Three, two, one. Hello. God bless you guys. And I want to welcome, if there's any friends of Austin Sims is going to be listening to this, we want to welcome you. And regular people that are going to be listening to this, I welcome you. Austin welcomes you. Today, we're going to be discussing. Last week, Austin and I got together and we discussed transitional fossils. And this week, we're discussing the origin of life. The origin of life. A very interesting discussion. Austin Sims is going to be coming from the atheist perspective. So he will be discussing abiogenesis, and I'll be discussing abiogenesis and biogenesis. So, Austin, I'd like to welcome you. Thank you very much for coming back. It's a joy having you. And why don't you give everybody a little bit of introduction? Let everybody get to know you.
Hi, my name's Austin Sims. I'm a 32-year-old former Texan Michigander. I do some moderately scientific work for a living, and I'm interested in evolution versus creationism as a matter of idle interest and as a hobby because I find biology interesting. And I was very, albeit immediately, very, very briefly, a creationist myself when I was very, very young. But I eventually changed sides and became a full-on brainwashed evolutionist. And so, yeah, I feel a little bit of a responsibility to kind of, I feel like it's kind of offering creationists an intervention that maybe their friends and family are perhaps a little too unwilling or unable to give to them because, they lack the scientific acumen or the motivation. But I also just find their ideas interesting and amusing, and debating them is very intellectual and it's entertaining to me. So I like to do it. And I've been actually thinking about taking some debates after, debating it online using comments and social media for a couple of years. And I saw your post and I was like, why not? So here I am.
Well, we're glad to have you. And now, last week we had a discussion on. Oh, let me tell everybody too. I'm going to warn you ahead of time, guys. Austin and I were. Now he lives in Michigan, and I live in Kentucky, so we weren't brainstorming together, but we both had issues that kept us up during the night. So neither of us have had any sleep. Uh, and it was dog issues for both of us, amazingly. Uh, he
So
had,
I have an issue. You're lagging a little. I think I'm going to move to my living room.
okay.
Go ahead. Sorry. Hate to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's much better here.
Okay, good.
Closer
So
to my Wi-Fi.
he had issues with his dog and had to take care of his dog last night. And last night, my little dog was snake bit, uh,
That's
protecting my
so.
wife.
I'm so sorry. That's terrible.
Yeah. So, but God has. We prayed over the little fella, and he had a little bit of a knot on his snake bite, but he didn't break out in a fever, didn't vomit.
Well, that's
Uh,
a good sign.
he's been a little sluggish, but I guess that's to be expected. I'm pretty sure it was either a moccasin or a what do you call him, copperhead, because it had that fat body and little blunt tail, and it was that was about all I could see of it, except that it was about 3 inches around. It was a good sized snake, a few feet long. But he's doing well. So if everybody could remember little Malachi, I'd appreciate it. But last week we
Indeed.
so excuse us if we seem tired, guys. We are.
I actually have a
But
funny anecdote that I think is kind of related to that, if you don't mind me sharing it before we
sure,
continue. I used to live in
sure.
Texas, like I stated when I was, describing my background a little bit. The first time I ever saw a rattlesnake, it was while my mom was stopped at a railroad crossing. And I pointed out the window and I said, "Look, mommy, a rattler." And the rattlesnake, she waited until that rattlesnake started slithering across the road, at which point she put it in a drive, ran over that snake, backed up over it, ran over it, backed up over it,
Yeah,
and then got out and poked it with a stick to make sure it was dead. Those snakes are lethal and dangerous, especially
yes,
down
they
there
are.
in the South.
Yeah, I'm a firm
You said
believer
you
in
shot him a
you
couple
don't play with
times.
the snake. Yeah, yeah. I fired at him 3 times and only hit him twice. And then he disappeared under some stuff, and I wasn't about to go into it in the dark and try to find him. So, um,
Are you a
if
marksman?
God wills, he's what's that?
You like firearms, I assume?
I'm pretty decent with him. Yeah, yeah.
I like firearms
So
myself. I was in ROTC, sold firearms for a
yeah,
couple of
yeah,
years.
yeah.
What'd you
Cool.
shoot at
Cool.
it with?
Little 9 millimeter.
Oh yeah,
It was
nine
just
millimeters are
yeah,
great.
just
Very easy to use. You got the slide
I wish
action,
I
I assume. That's a common build for
yeah,
the 9 millimeter.
yeah, mine's a little Kel-Tec.
Oh,
It
I like
was the
those.
smallest 9 millimeter in production.
Very
Yeah,
nice
it's a
firearms.
nice, but
Yeah, so those when I was
I wished I would have brought my shotgun out with them, but I didn't. I just
shotguns
grabbed my
are
9 mil.
very effective. That spread is
Yes,
much more accurate than most humans are able to be.
yes, it is. But as it was, I was just able to injure him. I'm hoping he eventually died, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But at any rate, last week we had a discussion on transitional fossils, and it was interesting. Would you like to uh, kind of throw out a little something, give us a summation of last week's argument for yourself?
From my perspective, our argument was mainly about two topics: transitional fossils and speciation. And I talked a lot about speciation from the perspective that it is, powerful evidence that macroevolution is observable. And you talked about how you doubt the testability of transitional forms in the geological fossil evidence. And we had some interesting discussions about that. I think one of the more interesting discussions we had that turned out to be uh, unexpectedly relevant, because you yourself are a Chihuahua owner, is we talked about whether or not we think a wolf or a Chihuahua could produce a fertile non-hybrid offspring with one another. And I actually have a little bit planned to talk about that if we get into reproductive anatomy at all, like I wanted to talk about for this debate. So that'll be interesting, I think. But yeah, I think that's a pretty appropriate synopsis of the first debate. Any disagreements?
No, I thought it was interesting. You know, there are a lot of arguments that I've heard for transitional fossils, but the thing that I do fall back on is that um, I've got a little thing here. I'll just read real quick. This comes from St. Jude research, and it's entitled. It's interesting. It's entitled "A Hypothesis Can't Be Right Unless It Can Be Proven Wrong," and they go on to say, I'll just read the first couple of things here. A hypothesis is the cornerstone of the scientific method. I agree. And it is an educated guess about how the world works that integrates knowledge with observation. Everyone appreciates that a hypothesis must be testable to have any value. But there is a much stronger requirement that a hypothesis must meet. A hypothesis is considered scientific only if there is the possibility to disprove the hypothesis. In other words, we can't just say that we test a hypothesis, but we have to test it with a specific test that has the capacity and ability to actually disprove it. He goes on to say, a hypothesis or model is called falsifiable if it is possible to conceive of an experimental observation that disproves the idea in question. That is, one of the possible outcomes of the designed experiment must be an answer that, if obtained, it would disprove the hypothesis. So if we consider that, and then we look at transitional fossils, we observe our observation is similar. That's the observation. It has morphological features that are similar with the theropod dinosaur. So the hypothesis would go that Archaeopteryx is descended from theropod dinosaurs. Now, that's cool. We can hypothesize this. But then we have to test it. And the only test that's available that would have the capacity to prove that, and it would prove it either right or wrong. The only possible test that could prove this is a DNA test. It could test whether or not our hypothesis regarding its lineage is correct or not. Did it descend from theropod dinosaurs? If we had the DNA of both, that test could tell the story. It could prove or disprove the hypothesis. The only problem is we don't have those the DNA of these life forms. So in most cases, it becomes untestable. And if it's untestable, it can't be called a scientific theory. It's regulated to really no better than science fiction. Just a story, a cool, untested story.
Okay. I can respond to that if you want to hear what my thoughts on that would be. My thought would be that evolution is falsifiable, and there are tests that are falsifiable. There are things that are attainable that make the test testable and falsifiable enough that it's rational to consider it reasonably supported or well proven by the natural observations that support it. And what I'm sort of talking about when I say that are things like the geological column, the fact that no modern species exist at the lowest layer of fossil strata. So that shows that, modern species had to come from somewhere, that they were most likely arose from those ancient species that are mostly pretty much all extinct, that we have other evidence of, paleontological fossil evidence of, and that alone is powerful proof, that's the way it happened, that is how we can put the story together of the fact that evolution happened to these ancient species that are now only fossils and rocks and forensic evidence. So I do think it's testable, but we talked about that a lot previously in our first debate. So I think that's a good synopsis of both sides.
Well, I don't think an observation of the geological column can prove whether or not Archaeopteryx is descended from theropod dinosaurs, because the geological column is just going to reveal that they existed. Dr. Colin Patterson is a senior paleontologist for the British Museum of Natural History, and he says fossils can teach us many things, but they can't teach us what they descended to or from.
Yeah, you used the quote in our previous debate. No, I think the other observations help prove that. The other fossils of, theropod dinosaurs and the natural observations about how their life cycles existed, what they ate, how long they lived, where they lived. is pretty reasonable. And I think even if you can't get all of the genetic information, if you can get enough of it that you can show relatedness, which I think there is a lot of shown relatedness between the genetic familial relationship of all living organisms, that yeah, it is testable and observable enough, even without Archaeopteryx or any specific transitional forms actual DNA, because there are transitional forms that we have the DNA of that are still living in addition to all those fossil, forensic evidence transitional forms that people appeal to in those dusty old natural history museums, like things like platypus and mudskipper and lungfishes, and species that help support ideas about how evolution has woven this tapestry together of a real, naturally explained, falsifiable attempt to answer the question to the mystery of natural history, which I've written more about if we want to get into our prepared remarks at all on the debate of the topic. Which, if you want to start with abiogenesis, I think I agreed to allow that happen because I was going to take probably a little bit more time than you previously said I would have to expound on my side, which I appreciate very much, Eric. Thank you.
Not a problem, dude. I would like to say, though, that I believe your examples there all boil down to not science, but confirmation bias, and I'll explain why. The question of is Archaeopteryx descended from theropod dinosaurs? You can look at the geologic column, you can see where they exist there, and that doesn't tell you whether or not they're related. That's just another hypothesis, that you look at them in the geologic column and you pile up another untestable hypothesis on top of your first one. And then you can go to ERVs and you can say, well, ERVs are, well, no, there again, you're hypothesizing that because there are specific markers in the genomes that may be in the same order, and etc. in various animals, that your hypothesis then becomes that that's so because they are related and they have a common ancestor. But there again, you have to find that common ancestor and have its DNA to test that, and you don't.
Oh my goodness. Forgot I had that alarm set. Sorry.
That's okay.
That's usually my alarm to go pick up my daughter from her piano class, but I don't have to do that today.
God bless her heart.
She's beautiful. She's the pride and joy of my life.
I'll bet she is, brother. But speaking of abiogenesis and the beginning of life, I'm going to let Aaron give you a breakdown of why he believes life began without a God. Life began through some sort of a process. I'm not going to nail him down to any specific process, but just abiogenesis in general, meaning that life came from non-life. We have let's say, for instance, let's grant the Big Bang. We have a Big Bang. We have a universe. There's no life in it. Eventually, life began somewhere. And I believe that it would be Austin's position that it began through the process that we call abiogenesis. And it doesn't matter which particular flavor of abiogenesis. We'll just let him discuss that in general. Well, and in general, I'm going to go right ahead.
I was going to say, well, it so happens that the synopsis I prepared for my prepared remarks on abiogenesis pretty much covers that. So I'll go ahead and just read that. Abiogenesis is, in my opinion, the main and strongest weakness of evolutionary theory, with the substantial proviso that that's only if it can be said that there are any real weaknesses of evolutionary theory ever since the creation and perfection of genetics and genomics and the modern synthesis combining natural observations of Darwinian gradualism and punctuated equilibrium to create an incredibly comprehensive answer to the mystery of natural history. To further expound, I'm of the opinion that abiogenesis is not a weakness of evolutionary theory itself, or at the very least, not one that undermines the bulk of the theory's contentions, the usefulness of robust endeavors and ongoing confirmatory research based upon it that fundamentally renders it a working science, nor of the convincingness of its predictive and explanatory power as a theory for how the array of modern species were shaped into what they are presently from ancient extinct species, which we have fossilized paleontological and forensic evidence of, and as well as a theory of how they continue to change. I believe it is a challenge for biophysics, biochemistry. Abiogenesis is a challenge more for biophysics, biochemistry, molecular analysis, and for rational, falsifiable inquiry in general into one of the greatest mysteries in this puzzle of natural history, the onset of life itself from, a state in the world where nothing living existed. Hold on, I'm sorry, I lost my place in my remarks here for a second. There we go. I believe even if abiogenesis is ever supported as well as evolution and settles on an answer, I believe it will at best only call for some minor remodelings or reinterpreting of data and evidence and or modifications of specific minor details of the theory of evolution. I am very profoundly confident in this. In fact, so profoundly confident that I would bet my eternal soul on it. And certainly some creationists would contend I already have. I believe if abiogenesis can be supported as well as evolutionary theory, the overall convincingness and usefulness of life sciences as an investigative endeavor into reality has potential I couldn't even begin to imagine. I believe the effort to establish such an understanding would be worth it for the sheer auspiciousness attained by having such a comprehensive and accurate model of essentially the complete span of the history of life on Earth itself. However, one of the weaknesses of abiogenesis presents one of its greatest challenges. Even defining life itself seems much more difficult for scientists than a layman might expect. It seems no matter how they define it, there's always something that kind of seems like it might fit those it might qualify as living, even if it doesn't fit those exact categories or it doesn't fit them exactly how scientists would expect them to. So to give an example of what I'm talking about there, I'll invoke a very common and important type of what certainly most people will consider living organisms, viruses. Viruses are technically not considered living organisms by, the scientific definition of what constitutes life, because they don't reproduce except without a host organism, a healthy cell to hijack the DNA of and force it to make replications of itself, which I think most people would be familiar with if they've studied, a little bit of microbiology about how viruses work. I think most grade schools cover that. You there?
Yeah. Go right ahead.
No, that was it. That was my breakdown on abiogenesis. I think that answered the specific questions you asked. Do you remember what they were? If I didn't answer it, repeat them. I'll see if I can answer them better.
Well, I just wanted to allow you to give the best possible defense for abiogenesis that you could give here. So, just take your time. And if that's where you'd like to stop, that's okay.
Oh, I was just answering the specific question you asked. If I were to defend abiogenesis, which honestly I didn't prepare to do that very well, it would probably be a handful of things I would say in response to what I think are likely your main arguments around abiogenesis. Those are at the bottom of my notes here. So there's a couple things. There's the RNA world hypothesis, which is a very testable and supportable theory about how, the complex nucleotide systems that synthesize proteins for more complex organisms evolved from simpler nucleotide systems. The modern ones evolved from ancient simple ones, the RNA one versus the modern one, DNA, which you might be familiar with. There's the existence of specific organisms that seem to indicate that even the most hostile, unsurvivable environments are actually survivable by some of the most incredibly diverse, hardy organisms that exist, microorganisms called extremophiles. There are a handful of experiments with things like protein synthesis, using catalytic reactions, and I think there's some very interesting biochemistry arguments about how polymers work, specifically polypeptides. One of the more convincing ones, because a polypeptide chain is just a constructed polymer of several fused peptide monomers that can be made to replicate itself very simply. It literally only takes like 32 bits of this monomer. So 32 simple peptides, which would have existed in massive abundance, and they still exist in a massive abundance in nature, but the environment has changed, astronomically. It's not as catalytic as it was then. But if you even get just 32 of these in the right order, which would be incredibly easy to do over a long span of time with all of these interactions happening, once that 32-bit polypeptide chain exists and it starts replicating itself, some scientists might argue that's where natural selection starts. That's where it starts affecting living organisms on Earth, because that 32-bit polypeptide chain is subject to mutation, is subject to efficiency errors and corrections and breaks in the DNA and repairs. And yeah, I think that's a very interesting and powerful argument, especially because, like I said, all these things can be found in nature still. So it's reasonable to conclude they existed in the proto-oceans, which would have been, different but not hostile to the same kind of organism. And yeah, it seems really convincing to me, but I am not, a biochemist or biophysicist. And most of the people championing that theory are like, the top of the line scientists with multiple doctorates studying those things. But yeah, I think that's a general wrap up of the arguments and facts that kind of support an abiogenetic worldview. And I would actually kind of pivot a little bit and make a more kind of philosophical argument, which is that what in the world? Sorry about that.
That's okay. You're popular tonight.
Yeah. I guess I clicked snooze instead of dismiss. And that is that I think even creationism itself is an abiogenetic worldview, depending on how you philosophize God's existence, which I'd be willing to get into if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, we may do that, as a matter of fact. That's interesting. Anything you'd like to add to this?
No, I think that's a good starting point if you want to offer any rebuttals or, counter argument, different interpretation. Okay. I would love to see some data.
That's cool. I'm choosing a simplistic approach. Okay. And I just want to bear with what I view as the observable facts. And to begin, abiogenesis, for the reader or for the listener there that may be wondering what we're talking about, abiogenesis itself is the idea that life was formed from non-life. Now, what I find unusual about this is that so many people just take it for granted that it happened. And yet, when it comes right down to it, abiogenesis has never been observed in nature. And because of this fact alone, we can't call it a natural process. Because natural implies that we observe it in nature, and we don't. What we do observe is contrary to abiogenesis. But that being aside for the moment, not only has it never been observed in nature, we've never been able to recreate it in a lab. And I find that amazing because this would be in spite of our ability to examine rocks that we find on the earth. And we can tell pretty much through a spectrometer, we can determine what the atmosphere, what the earthly conditions were during that time when that rock was forming. And we can do that with pretty much any specific time on Earth. So this is in spite of the fact that we can determine what was the atmosphere, what were the Earth-like conditions at the time. We're not in the dark about that. We know. This is also in spite of the fact that we have the ability in our laboratories to recreate any atmosphere we would like. And so, despite all of this, we've still not been able to recreate abiogenesis. And what I find amazing is we know what the building blocks of life are. We can put them together any way you want to put them together. We can stack them up. We can do anything we want with them. We can strike them with lightning, shock them, irradiate them, just about any kind of radiation. We can mix them up. We can scream at them. We can threaten them, but we can't make them spark to life. We can't make them come to life.
Okay. So can I respond to that, or did you want to go with some more?
Well, I've got a couple more points if you would like to hear them.
Yeah, go ahead.
Most atheists that I know do try to separate abiogenesis from evolution, and I notice that you're not doing that, and I appreciate that. And let me commend you for not trying to.
I have to correct you. I am essentially separating them. I do believe that even if you disprove or prove abiogenesis, at best, it could only strengthen evolution. It won't strike down evolution. I would say it's technically possible, but the likelihood of it is, I'd put it asymptotically about 0%. But please continue, just to clarify.
Well, okay, let me...
I conceded that it could be considered a weakness of evolution.
Yeah. Well, let me try to pull something up here real quick. Okay. Now, this is from Berkeley University, from their Evolution 101 course. And this tells us that abiogenesis is a part of evolutionary studies, and that it is the beginning. And I want to explain why this is the beginning of the process of evolution. You see, people don't stop to consider what is actually being postulated through this process. What's being postulated is that it's not just one single cell that's suddenly forming. The claim is that there had to be a population of these things that evolved, and that's the terminology that Berkeley University uses. Life evolved. And the idea is that you have random falling together of things that are going to form the body of a cell. And while the body of a cell is just randomly falling together and forming in large populations, not just one at a time, you have the software. You have the cell that has many different capabilities, like it can eat, it can metabolize, it can do other things. It has little machines in it that helps it carry out these processes. It can split through mitosis. So it's got all this very advanced stuff that's just falling together accidentally, and then it fails. And it starts falling together again, and it fails, and it starts falling together again until all of a sudden you have a population of these things just laying there dead, non-living. And then something has to happen that nobody can explain. Somehow these things have to just pop to life
Okay.
and start replicating. So this
is
is
that you got more arguments there, or because I think I get the central conceit of your argument. If you have more data or facts to add, I would like to hear them, but I think I can maybe respond to a little bit now if I can have a second.
Well, if you'd like to, but to be honest, you haven't even heard half of it yet, brother.
We've been going for a couple minutes now, and you've made a couple arguments, and I would like to respond to a couple of them because I think help clearing them up, if you are interested in what I say about them, might get us closer to a productive conversation.
Well, would you mind just taking
I will allow you to keep talking a little bit longer, I guess.
Thank you. If you don't mind, just take a little note, because I don't want you to forget what you want to rebut. But I'd like to lay all this out because, I'm almost done. I'm about halfway through it. But so the hypothesis itself states that life kept trying to randomly fall together and it kept failing until it finally succeeded in populations.
This is kind of why I want to respond, because this is inaccurate. It's a straw man argument, but go on.
Well, I can read what they're telling us. Evolution encompasses a wide range of phenomenon, from the emergence of major lineages to mass extinctions.
Yeah, so that's part of what I want to respond to with my comments. What I was saying previously is the reason abiogenesis, whether it's wrong or right, or it gets proved or disproved, that I'm so very confident that it won't have that big of an effect on evolutionary theory, is because abiogenesis ties into evolution, not the other way around. The reason being that evolutionary theory is so well supported and has all of these evidence of microorganisms, especially even ancient ones, and how they developed. So saying that, evolution needs abiogenesis to make sense, it's, I think, a non sequitur. It doesn't logically, rationally make sense. Even with or without abiogenesis, evolution still makes sense. But I think, of course, abiogenesis uses evolution to support abiogenetic theory, because evolution itself is so well supported. If that's a different perspective, that kind of makes sense of where I'm coming from as, an evolutionist. You there? Uh-oh. I think we lost him. I was going to ask if he thinks that's fair and rational, but oh, did you quit? I hope you didn't quit. I was enjoying our conversation. It was still being pretty interesting. Are you there? Is anybody there?
Okay, sorry, I dropped off. I have a bad signal going on.
There you are.
Okay, so what I'm saying here is, let me pull this up. Okay, can you hear me, bud?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Test. Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, let me get my signal back up here right. I was this evening.
You're coming in a little patchy. I think I missed some of what you were saying there. If you're talking. You there? Uh-oh. Am I losing connection here? No, it says I'm connected and I've got internet access. Boo, boo, boo. Yeah. Yeah, this is awkward. Tim, are you seeing just me now? Because that's all I'm seeing. I see your comment in the chats. Comments in the chat. Hello, Brother Timothy, Super Shadow. Well, I guess since connection troubles are happening, I'll use this time to make some of my own points, which I was hoping to do. Me and Eric were talking about what kind of format this debate was going to take, and we had a little bit of kerfuffle because he said when we were talking about it, setting it up in the private conversations, you can take 15 minutes, you can take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however much you want to take. And then I let him know before we started the debate this time that I actually had prepared remarks that I timed out somewhere around 35 to 45 minutes, and that they had, interactive elements. So, parts where I would ask a question or even make a joke or two. And, so it could be anywhere from 40 to 60 minutes, but he said that would probably be too long and too complicated for his audience. But since, we're having this issue, I'll seize on that and take an opportunity to talk about it, since I'm pretty proud of my reproductive remarks. Felt like, oh, here he goes. You back? Hello? Uh-oh.
Okay. Can you hear me now again?
Yes. You there? I can hear you. Hello? Hello, nice to meet everybody. Okay, he cut out again, it looks like. Until he speaks up, I'll get into what I wanted to talk about. Reproductive anatomy is an area of life science inquiry in which evidence supporting the current model postulated by evolutionary theory is especially abundant. Reproductive anatomy and strategies have been pivotal in the development of the vast majority of the taxonomic clades categorizing all the species on Earth into an easy to follow and support web of relative relatedness based on highly convincing observable data, such as embryological similarities, vestigial functions, and biological features, and morphological analysis, especially the analysis of ocean mammals. There's so much evidence in this particular topic that even the evidence can be broken down into other categories deserving their own synopsis. I set out, in fact, to write an argument, but all I ended up writing were synopses of these enormous bodies of evidence comprised of all these natural observations and theories about how they support evolution's answer to the mystery of natural history. So I'll go in order of the ones that I think are the absolute best evidence for evolution theory and my personal opinion. And as I'll admit, as someone who finds the theory fascinating and studies it almost entirely merely as a hobby, and whose scientific work only at best tangentially involves the theory. The first one is one that can be broken down into subcategories like I was talking about, and that is reproductive isolation. Evidence that falls under the umbrella of reproductive isolation is itself so comprehensive and varied, it can easily be broken down into those further subcategories. We'll start with The first set of subcategories being speciation, artificial selection, sexual selection, repeatable experiments, ring spirit species, and geographic isolation. There are probably more, but I smoke too much weed. We'll start with A, speciation. Speciation is massive evidence for evolution. Speciation is one of the things that has been studied by mankind the longest, alongside artificial selection. That they've been studying this since before the modern version of evolution has existed, way before. Speciation broadly occurs when one population of organisms, which was once interfertile with other populations of organisms that look very similar to itself and have similar genomes, change enough through gradual adaptations over several generations that it can no longer perfectly and relatively easily produce fertile non-hybrid offspring with populations that haven't undergone similar changes. Speciation is especially powerful in germane evidence evolution because even a number of creationists now admit to it, such as Ken Ham and Kent Hovind, and even my new friend Eric Jewell, as per our last debate. I consider this as a huge accomplishment, regardless of if evolutionary theory as science represents it is true, although of course I think it is, because it means we're all getting closer to getting a more accurate view of reality, regardless of what label we call ourselves or each other, which is the entire goal of science anyway. Oh, hey, you back?
Hey, yeah, I'm back. Okay, now I'm going to lay out my my little thing for abiogenesis and biogenesis.
Okay.
In order, and I'm glad you had a little bit of time to lay out a lot more of what you wanted to lay out.
Yeah, I got into a little bit of it there.
No, good. So my points again were that the Berkeley University describes abiogenesis as a process of life's evolution, how life evolved. It didn't just happen to one cell. They claim that it happened to populations of cells that just suddenly formed. They fell together.
There's lots of theories.
Well, pardon me. I would like to lay this out.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, the process, there are lots of theories. There's different theories about how it happened, but they all agree that life evolved and that it kept trying, and it would get close to building a cell, but it would fall short and start again. That's the synopsis that I've read everywhere I've read about it. And then they go on to claim that this didn't just happen to one cell, but this was populations of cells, possibly hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of them that are forming in a large population all at once. And then as they're forming, they're not alive. They're falling together, they're forming, they're not reproducing, so they have to start all over from scratch, and they have to do it in large populations. And then at the end of the day, when it's all put together, you have the body of the cell that is formed, and it is in effect a machine with many different types of functions. And at the same time that it was forming this machine from scratch, it's also forming the software that operates that machine perfectly, called DNA. Inside that machine, simultaneously, while everything is accidentally falling together. And then all of a sudden, something happens. They don't know what it is. And it just makes them pop to life all of a sudden, all at the same time. And they start multiplying. And that's the story of abiogenesis, how life evolved. And I think it's I'm sorry, but that's more fantastic than any fairy tale I've ever heard. And it's certainly not anything that we observe. It's not anything that we've been able to recreate in a lab. So we go from there. We can begin to see that this is not a natural act at all. That we don't observe these things falling together. We don't observe it happening in nature. We can't make it happen in the lab. And so I call it an unnatural process that opposes everything that we observe. And this brings us to what we do observe. which was given to us by Louis Pasteur in the form of something that is called biogenesis. Biogenesis now is a real observable science, and it's tested every single day. And it is the antithesis to abiogenesis.
No.
Pardon me, I'd like to finish.
Mm-hmm.
The biogenesis theory states that all living organisms can only arise from other living organisms through reproduction of some sort, meaning life can only come from life. That's what we observe. And this directly contradicts the idea of spontaneous generation and abiogeneration, abiogenesis, which both propose.
Yeah, but not the second one.
Well, abiogenesis and spontaneous. It opposes them both. Observation does. It opposes them both because both are proposed that life can arise from non-living matter. Okay, now what we observe is that doesn't happen. In other words, the atheist default of abiogenesis is contrary to what we do observe in nature, while at the same time, it's absolutely consistent with the idea of God. You see, a life, God would have been that life that lived before creation. And my point is, something had to have lived first. Something had to have been here first. It was either the universe or a God, one or the other. Now, we observe that non-living materials do not bring forth life. Non-living materials do not bring forth consciousness and intelligence. But living, conscious, intelligent creatures bring forth life and consciousness and intelligence. So we have to accept that either the universe was first or there is a God that brought forth the universe. One of them has to be true. And if we're going to be consistent with what we observe in nature, then we have to say that a non-living universe bringing forth life and consciousness, etc., is contrary to what we observe. But if there is a God that brought forth life and consciousness, that is absolutely consistent with everything that we observe. And even when we get into quantum mechanics observes that matter isn't what we take it to be, what it seems to be. When something is not being observed or measured, it is in a quantum state. And this, well, we know this from particles, we know this from sand, we know this from atoms, we know this from molecules that are the biggest ones that we've tested so far are like 6,000, 7,000 atom molecules. And it always gives us the same thing. When it's not being observed, it acts like it's got an interference pattern, a radio wave. It looks like a radio wave. When it is being observed, it looks like it ought to look like. You send a particle through two slits, it's going to go through one of those two slits. And it's only going to make two lines or one line behind the background behind it. Now, what this means is, if quantum mechanics is true, then there had to be an observer of the creation of the universe. There had to be. Because E equals mc squared. We have what's called inflation. These things don't work out in the quantum world without observation. It would act like a radio wave, but it didn't. Something observed the creation. And the only thing that could observe the creation of a universe before there was a universe would be by definition a God. So all of this stuff, I'm almost done. If you could bear with me just a moment.
Okay.
So while abiogenesis is the
I think you're filibustering.
I think you can let me finish, Austin. While abiogenesis...
For a while now.
Well, so did you, buddy. While abiogenesis postulates life from non-life, and biogenesis
Yeah, he's
insists
never going to be done.
Biogenesis insists that there has to be a life to bring forth life. I think hands down, the atheist doesn't stand on anything solid. Everything he stands on is sinking sand.
I think we know what you think. You've been talking about it for like 20 minutes.
Well, so were you, dude. Now let me finish.
You dropped out. You weren't there, so I took the
I did not interrupt you ever. Okay, so don't interrupt me, Austin. Be a good guest.
I'm trying.
Every single time that is. Now, this is what I want everybody to understand. Abiogenesis is tested against biogenesis billions, hundreds of billions of times every single day. And abiogenesis fails miserably, while biogenesis is confirmed every single time an egg hatches. Whether it's a spider egg, a chicken egg, a roach egg, every single time an egg hatches, it's proving the veracity of biogenesis, that it takes a life to bring forth a life. Not only that, but it also proves that life brings forth after its own kind and nothing else.
Okay.
Now, not only every time an egg hatches.
You're starting another argument. Can I get an approximation how much longer it's going to be?
You can let me finish. Every time a cell divides.
You're filibustering. You're not being fair.
So I let you lay out yours with no interruption, and you don't want to let me lay out
mine. You
mine
interrupted me when you came back. You didn't let me lay it out without
every
interrupting.
Single time. Not only every single time.
Okay, I don't think it's
but every single time
to ask
every single
approximately time. How much longer you're going to go here before I get a chance to respond. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Please give me something here. I'm trying to.
Austin, quit interrupting me. Every time, not only every single egg that hatches is a test, every single time a cell divides, abiogenesis is being tested against biogenesis. Now, in the human body alone, you have 330 million cells per day that divide. Every day, every single day. And that's just one human body in one day. Multiply that by 8 billion bodies, and that's how many times just in the human bodies, in the human race, a cell divides. That doesn't include every cell on Earth that divides in a single day. So you have billions and billions and billions of times cell divides every day, and it verifies the veracity of biogenesis. Every single time it proves that life brought forth life, and every single time it proves that it brought forth after its own kind. Abiogenesis, on the other hand, is failed. Abiogenesis, well, if you want to leave in a huff, Austin, you may. So I'm going to finish my presentation. I can't help it if you didn't finish yours. If you didn't, I told you could have the first 15 or 20 minutes. I told you that. So be generous and be fair. So not only does every single egg that hatches and every single cell that divides prove the veracity of biogenesis and falsify abiogenesis, but every live birth as well. So biogenesis is, dude, if you're going to, I'll bring you up when I'm done with my presentation. So biogenesis is proven every time there's a live birth, every time an egg hatches, or every time a cell divides. And every single time that happens and biogenesis is verified, then what happens to abiogenesis? It is falsified. Absolutely. Every single time. There you go. Now, if you'd like to rebut that, Austin, you may feel free to rebut that.
Do I get a chance to talk now?
Yeah, you didn't pay attention, did you?
No, I heard everything you said. It was all a giant straw man.
A
It was
straw
a
man.
big straw man argument.
How is it a straw man? I'm dealing with
Talked about,
abiogenesis.
okay, well, you know what? You had your chance. So am I going to get to talk now?
Yeah,
Or are you
show
going
us
to
how
talk
it's a
over
straw
me?
man. Go right ahead.
Because you don't even have a good definition for what life is. You are using a very complex definition of life that more fits a modern view of life, whereas abiogenesis' theory about what constitutes the early building blocks of life is something much more simple. Like I explained with the theory of polypeptide chains, the idea of, a form you could easily form 32 peptides into a polypeptide chain that is then self-replicating, which of course they tie evolution into that because evolution is already such a sound theory, and they're using it to put together a better theory for an even more complex mystery of natural history, how life itself happened. And I think they've got some pretty good theories about it. I think creationists focus on it a little bit too much because they're doing a God of the gaps argument, which is basically, it's a different kind of straw man. You're saying because, abiogenesis and science can't figure out, that complicated of a mystery about natural history that it could only be God, which I think is a fallacious argument. It's illogical. But I also think you're wrong about abiogenesis because you're straw manning it. You're representing it as life just falling together, and it's a lot more complex than that. It's a theory that you have to even ask yourself the question what life even is before you can begin to fully comprehend the, answer they're putting together about it and how they're testing it. Let me ask you a question, or did you drop? You're gone again? Oh, well, I was going to ask if he knows of any single, pure element in all of chemistry that is not considered a non-living material, because if he doesn't, then absolutely life can only come from non-living materials. I mean, there's no such thing as living hydrogen, living carbon, living, silicone, the most common element in Earth. Yeah, no, it's a total misnomer. It's a straw man. Life is basically a chemical reaction, I think, is the way abiogenesis thinks about it. And that chemical reaction was once much, much, much simpler than the chemical reaction that exists in modern species. So it is a bit of a straw man to say that, abiogenesis says that this just fell together. That I don't think they're saying that's how it works, but I understand why creationists misrepresent the argument that way. I mean, if you're having connection issues again, since you had so much time to talk, I'll get back into my prepared remarks about evolutionary evidence from reproductive anatomy. I believe I was at subpoint B, artificial selection. I asked this question in the previous debate, and I find it an especially provocative one that ties into the subpoint before and after this one. Do you think a Chihuahua could produce fertile non-hybrid offspring with a wolf? Although this question seems very simple, and I believe evolutionary theory does actually make it fairly simple to answer, it can actually be more complicated than it seems at the surface. Let's dive deeper, shall we? Some relevant facts. Chihuahuas and wolves share an incredible amount of DNA. They're like 99.8% of their DNA is virtually exactly the same, depending on how you analyze it, which scientists use two main methods, point-to-point comparison and a set of about 3 or 4 evaluative comparison methods, which are much more complicated and involve analyzing how the genomes being compared themselves were formed before any comparison of sequences of base pairs takes place, which is mainly done by top-of-the-line professionals who have extensively studied complicated molecular biochemistry and some of the leading problems in abiogenetic studies, ironically, things like protein synthesis, which honestly I expected you'd touch on more. Yet despite having a maybe only 0.2% difference in DNA, depending on how you compare them, they are observably very different organisms, as well as having a very obvious and provable common ancestry simultaneously. And this was one of the points where I thought we could, interact a little bit more instead of just having a typical debate. I wanted to ask if, you think that's a fair assessment of Chihuahuas and wolves, if they are similar, but, different, but related. and which ways they're different and which ways they're similar. I would say they're similar in things like body plan. They're similar in a lot of phylogenetically supported taxonomic clades like bilatera and placenta and amniota, which I'll get into more. It doesn't have anything to do with that biogenesis. I wanted to talk about reproductive isolation, and he said I would have plenty of time to do that, but then we ended up having to debate about how the format was going to go before it even started, and now he keeps falling in and out of the debate. I'm doing my best here, but this is kind of getting silly, getting to be a little bit of a circus. He talked and talked and talked about abiogenesis and kind of filibustering, making the same point over and over again. And I wanted to respond, but he wouldn't let me. But now he's having trouble connected. So I went back to what I wanted to talk about to begin with, which was evidence for evolution from, the comprehensive studies of reproductive anatomy, which right now I'm talking about artificial selection. And specifically posing the question, if a wolf and a chihuahua would be able to form a fertile non-hybrid offspring together, which, despite searching extensively in every search engine and database I could think of, I could not find any such evidence whatsoever that a wolf and a chihuahua have ever actually formed a hybrid. I asked several scientists and creationists, at least 30 or more of both, using social media, and no expert of any kind I could find could give me any example of any experimental or observed natural processes, such as successes of chihuahuas and wolves even attempting reproducing together at all, let alone in such a way that it produced, fertile non-hybrids, even let alone, fertile hybrids, let alone fertile non-hybrids. So I can strongly hypothesize that this is because the ethical, legal, and moral ramifications of such an experiment would be extremely cruel and bizarre. For one, can you not follow what I'm talking about? It seems pretty simple. For one, the two species are greatly different in size, which introduces some serious challenges for the easiest kind of reproduction we can achieve. To be good crass, the good old-fashioned kind, the old bow chicka wow wow. I'm talking about the sexy times, as Borat would say. A chihuahua and a wolf with the different sexual gametes necessary to produce a fertilized ovum coming together and achieving actual physical sexual contact. I suppose it warrants being specific, and because I think it's simultaneously amusing and illuminating, I'll be more accurate and blunt. A chihuahua or a wolf probably isn't going to be able to engage its chram or vagine in sexual congress with the other species. Let's frame how this interpretation is logical using something biologists refer to as the same pen test. The idea that one way you can test how compatible two certain populations of organisms are reproductively is to place them in the same pen and see if they are capable of mating and reproduction, and if so, what they produce. Although humans could intervene in all kinds of ways to perhaps create or aid sexual contact, due to the fact that, as mentioned previously, it would be extremely cruel and unusual to subject members of these different species to such treatment, precluded as a real possibility. I'll avoid speculating any more than broadly about how they might build some kind of apparatus or what series of chemical injections scientists might hypothetically need to concoct to actually make it happen when such a sterile and artificial environment renders the test organisms totally uninterested in and unwilling to even attempt procreation, even if it is possible. I think it's reasonable to forego these considerations because it makes success too complicated. You won't be able to achieve any sort of appreciable impact, such as, significant quantities of natural or even artificial hybridization or horizontal gene flow between these disparate populations of organisms. I think it's pretty obvious how the same pen test would go, no matter what scenario you want to apply to it. But let's be specific since we're breaking it down. If a male chihuahua tries to establish sexual contact with a female wolf, this is the one scenario where you might actually be able to get something. If somehow the male is actually able to achieve sexual contact with the wolf and, reproduce, mate, and I'm going to be using a lot of super legit scientific technical terms here, deposit its baby jelly in the nursery, you might be able to. Oh, are you back? I'll just keep on talking until I hear you. You might be able to get some kind of hybrid, like a Chihuahua Wolf hybrid. And
Okay, I'm back.
hey,
Hello.
I don't know where we're at in this conversation anymore because you dropped out so long. But if you're willing to, I have a topic we could talk about that's actually kind of relevant since we were talking about your Chihuahua
Austin.
Malachi earlier.
Well, we're talking. You see, when we scheduled this, we were going to be talking about
I said from the
the
get-go I wanted to
origin of
talk about
the origin,
reproductive
the or
isolate,
the or
me too, but
the origin of life. And I think we should let everybody know what happened here. I told you that I was going to give you like a 15-minute opener. So
I already explained it in one of the times when you dropped out, but yeah.
that if you 3 or 4 more minutes, I would let you have that.
Okay.
And then today, and our discussion was going to be on abiogenesis versus biogenesis. It's just the origin of life. So
yeah, I'm gonna talk about it.
Then when I talked to you this afternoon, you're telling me you prepared something that's going to take you 45 minutes, and you were expecting me to give you 45 minutes, dude, for an opening.
Well, you said 15, and then you said 20, and I started writing things, and it ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to, which I admitted. But I kind of hoped you would give it to me anyways because you seemed so generous about it when we were talking, and I really respected and appreciated that. But I do understand how it might be.
So I was
fair. So
I was generous with the 15 or 20, and you decided to try to take 45. And then when I tried to give my presentation,
a lot to talk about.
That's cool, but I gave
I had
you
a lot of
uninterrupted
points to make. You were making the same point over and over again.
Well, you're talking over me right now, even.
And I only have so much time, and I can only maintain so much interest when you're going to repeat the same point over and over again.
Let me finish what I'm saying. Quit interrupting.
I'm listening.
Okay, so when I give you that time, uninterrupted. I asked you, is that all you'd like to present? I asked you, I goaded you on for more. Just
that was on the topic of abiogenesis. I wanted to talk about reproductive anatomy.
I don't care what you want to talk about. This is our subject. So, and I told you could include that, but it's in your.
Yeah, you did, and you're not letting me. Dude. So.
And then after I gave you all the time.
You said you were down to debate for 3 hours if you wanted, so I was ready to go for 40 minutes.
I gave you your time.
I mean, strongly disagree, but let's try and salvage this. Do you want to? What should I keep talking about? What I wanted to talk about? Reproductive anatomy, or do you want to talk some more about abiogenesis, hopefully making some other points than the ones you were making previously? Or maybe introducing some kind of data
Oh my goodness. No, Tim Tyler, the rules were that Austin would get the first 15 to 20 minutes to open up, and then I would follow, and I would give him those minutes uninterrupted, and he would give me my minutes uninterrupted. You see that I gave Austin all the time that I had promised, and he's had much more than that. And I gave it to him uninterrupted. But Austin has a problem with me presenting my side uninterrupted now, which is okay. I understand why. Because my side, when you lay down all of this, you can see how abiogenesis is ridiculous and contrary to everything that we observe. We observe that life brings forth life. Nothing else does. We observe that we don't see it recreated in a lab. We don't see it in nature. So abiogenesis is an unnatural act. And it's falsified absolutely every single time a chicken is born, or every time an egg hatches, every time roaches hatch. It's verified every time a cell divides, all those billions and hundreds of it simply fails. Abiogenesis is never observed, and it always fails. Biogenesis is always verified, and that's just the facts of the matter. Those are the observations that we make. So you can stand on abiogenesis, but it's in blind faith, and it's in spite of the evidence against it. It's in spite of its utter failure. You're believing in a falsified theory, dude. When you test it and it doesn't pass the muster, it is falsified. And what do you do when it's falsified? You look for a reason why it's false. And if you can't find it and you keep trying it over and over and over again and you can't make it work, well, it's just, not ever going to happen, obviously. So if you do want to show us, if you want to grow up, Austin, and show us where abiogenesis has ever succeeded, and if you want to show us where biogenesis has ever failed, that's okay. Now, there you go. Can you give us an example of biogenesis ever failing? And can you give us one example abiogenesis ever
I'm going to respond, but I'm probably not going to respond in the way you want me to. And that response is going to be to tell you that I think you have a misapprehension about how the different scientific theories, abiogenesis, biogenesis, and spontaneous generation relate to each other, which I think I can clarify by kind of explaining what those different theories are. Spontaneous generation was a long.
The only thing I said related spontaneous generation to abiogenesis is that they both postulate life came from non-life.
Okay, can I continue my point? I haven't even gotten into it yet.
Sure, that's the only comparison I made.
Spontaneous generation is the theory that it was a long disproved theory that simple organisms like tiny little maggots, tiny little flies, the tiny little microorganisms that compose mold, that those kinds of organisms could spontaneously appear under the right conditions, which was an attempt at explaining the natural observation, that if you leave meat out in the sun and you come back, you'll see maggots and flies and stuff crawling around on it. Or that if you watch a pond, it seems like, tadpoles and frogs and mosquitoes just kind of pop out of nowhere. At least that was the theory, at that time, during which, biological sciences were much, much less developed than they are now. That was what spontaneous generation was. Louis Pasteur disproved that by proving the idea of biogenesis, which showed that what that actually was already living organisms in the environment, things called microorganisms. That was the creation of what's called the germ theory of disease, which totally disproved, you know, the theory of spontaneous generation, and which biogenesis is related to. But it's not, it doesn't relate to abiogenesis in that way, because we're describing, for a number of reasons, but I think the biggest one is we're describing completely different Earth states. We're talking about a modern kind of Earth that's already dominated by already existing organisms, lots of ambient microorganisms, and there's way more of those than there are an abundance of uncatalyzed building blocks of life in the environment, because those already existing complex microorganisms and bigger complex multicellular organisms spend an incredible amount of what energy and facility they have as living organisms consuming those ambient resources.
Are you denying
very early Earth, there's a lot more of those ambient resources out there, and they're not being consumed by already living organisms. So on that kind of Earth, abiogenesis is absolutely possible, because there isn't any biological organism to cause biogenesis, which is the theory abiogenesis use.
Are you saying you can't recreate that atmosphere in a lab?
You can try to create a facsimile of it, but I will concede, no, abiogenesis hasn't accomplished a lot of testing. It's a very, very new theory, very bleeding edge.
It's not a new theory at all.
Theory itself,
that's ridiculous. It's
relatively new theory. It's only
Austin, you got to quit talking once in a while, okay? Let somebody else talk too.
Wow,
abiogenesis is not
so.
Abiogenesis is not a new theory. Abiogenesis is an old theory. Okay? And all it is the idea that life came from non-life. Now, how did abiogenesis? Now, do you disagree with me? Did abiogenesis and what is it? Spontaneous regeneration? Are you denying that both of them postulate life from non-life?
Do you want to hear my thoughts? You keep muting
me.
me.
I would like for you to answer that. Do you say that I'm wrong when I say they postulate life from non-life?
No, I don't think that's wrong.
Well, thank you.
That's what abiogenesis is. It's the idea that life began as a much more simple chemical reaction that isn't very much at all similar in pretty much any appearance to modern life.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking
to answer way more specifically and give details to support.
I'm just asking it. Okay, yes or no is yes or no.
I'm giving you yeses, and I'm giving you even more then.
That's cool. So I'm not wrong then. You said I was wrong. So I'm not wrong then by stating
you're not wrong about
let me finish.
I was saying you were wrong about something else. I said you were wrong about how these different theories, abiogenesis, genetic or spontaneous generation, biogenesis, and the germ theory of disease, how they all relate to each other. That's what I.
No, okay, I'm going to explain to you how I'm right. Abiogenesis and spontaneous regeneration. You just agreed with me. Both postulate life comes from non-life. You just agreed with me. Okay. Now we get to biogenesis. Biogenesis is the exact opposite. It observes that life never comes from non-life. It observes, yes, it does. Okay, let me pull it up. You want to shake your head no. We'll go to the biogenesis definition. I will pull it up for you. This is the definition: the development of life from pre-existing life. The synthesis of chemical compounds or structures in living organisms compare biosynthesis. Now we can also, what is the simple definition of biogenesis? The principle that living organisms originate only from other living organisms closely similar to themselves. That is the definition of biogenesis. Now, when you extend that, if only living things bring forth living things, we can also observe that only conscious things bring forth conscious things. Only things with consciousness brings forth things with consciousness. You're sitting there shaking your head no. So give me an example of a conscious being arising without the development of another
Actually, I think I'm going to be
being
done
before.
unless you ever want to have a debate with an impartial moderator because you clearly don't know how to do it. Have a good
Well,
one. We'll talk again about this later. Outside of a debate, I've had enough of this tonight. You have a good one. Good night.
So you can't. Okay, you can storm off in a huff. That's okay. But the fact is, you're angry because, my friend, you were proven wrong. I just proved right here that your objections were not valid at all. You were wrong in your objection. So there you go, guys. My friend, the atheist, had to quit. Now, that was really ironic that I offered him the first 15 or 20 minutes to open up, and he wants to demand 40 and 45. And then when I told him, look, we can't have 45-minute openings. We just can't have it. We don't have time for that because we've got to have discussions, rebuttals. We have to have questions from the audience. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted an echo chamber where only he spoke. And even when I laid out my argument, he didn't want to let me speak in spite of my generosity. And Super Shadow, what's that? Are people like you? If you think you can take his place, if you think you can answer any of these things that I've brought out, you feel free. But I'm going to reiterate what we found out today. Every single time an egg hatches, whether it's a spider egg, a chicken egg, or a roach egg, a mosquito egg, every single time it proves abiogenesis is false, and it proves that biogenesis is true. It proves that life only comes from life. Every single time it proves that abiogenesis is wrong. Every single time a cell divides, which in the human body alone, one human body, over 300 million cells divide every single day. Multiply that by 8 billion humans, and you've got hundreds of billions of times these things divide every single day just in human bodies. That doesn't even touch every other thing that divides every day in animals and plants and etc. But every single time a cell divides, it substantiates biogenesis, where it says only life brings forth life, and it brings forth after its own kind. Every single time it divides, it falsifies abiogenesis, and the atheist stance proves it to be wrong. So, if anybody wants to debate any of this, that's cool. I will take you on, and I actually have a friend, Austin, that will moderate for us if you think you can beat me in a debate on this issue. I can contact him. He holds debates for people on a regular basis. So I will talk to him. I will, you keep repeating your straw man, he says. It's not a straw man if it's directly relating. Yep, Christian Carpenter, that's true. Well, what I was hoping for, Christian Carpenter, was just a friendly discussion. We had one last week. I don't know why it couldn't happen this week. I don't know why he couldn't take his 15 or 20-minute open and give me mine. I don't know, but it's okay. And I'm sure you're right. Christian Carpenter, JG would be glad to host a debate. So next time I see him, Austin, I will contact him and ask him if he'll host it. And then I'll give you the link if you're up for it. I'm perfectly willing to do that. I don't know why we couldn't have a friendly discussion this time, buddy. I just don't know. But I sure tried. And I don't know. I don't know why it didn't work out. But that's okay. No, I didn't want to filibuster. I gave you your first 15 or 20 minutes and more. I would like to have had 10. Let people speak. I gave you your time. Don't pretend I didn't. So that's cool. Will do. So God bless everybody here. This will stand. And I think it's going to reflect to anybody that really watches that I did give you everything I promised you I would, dude. And you didn't want me to lay out my side of the argument, which is cool. That's okay. I'm willing to try again too. So God bless everybody. Have a wonderful day. I apologize to everyone who was expecting more. God bless you. Thank you. Bye-bye.